All right, I think we've got everybody who's supposed to be here this evening. So thanks for joining us for tonight's work session. We've got a presentation from Kyle Patterson, the Director of Organizational Effectiveness, and he's going to be giving us an incentive evaluation report out. And with that, I'll kick it over to Kyle.
Good evening, commissioners. As Crystal mentioned, my name is Kyle Patterson. I'm the director of the newly created Department of Organizational Effectiveness for the City of Boise, joined tonight by my colleague, Deanna Dupuis from PDS. In case you have any hard questions, I'll ask her to come up and answer those. And we're here to update you on some of the data and evaluation work we're doing related to the modern zoning code. So obviously the zoning code is a really important piece of policy for our community, right? And I really appreciate that Mayor McLean and City Council have made clear that they want to take a very data-driven approach to the zoning code, right? Where we are very clear about the goals we're trying to accomplish with the zoning code, where we're measuring progress over time, and where we're falling short, that we make changes to the zoning code to make sure we meet those goals. And really, that's the role of the Department of Organizational Effectiveness, is creating those data-driven feedback loops for all of you, for mayor, for council, so you all have access to the data and the information you need to make good decisions about the zoning code. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Here are a few of the policy goals for the zoning code up on the screen. Not at all a comprehensive list, but some important ones. We're going to be most focused tonight on the policy goal on the far right, have a strategy to produce affordable and sustainable housing. So our agenda for today, first I'll zoom out and talk about some of the data and evaluation components we have going on, either currently in progress or planned for the future. But we're going to spend the vast majority of the time talking about some analysis that we've done related to the incentives in the zoning code for sustainability and affordability. And we have some recommendations for how to improve those and make them more effective. And then we'll talk next steps. So this is a global look at all of the data and evaluation work we're doing right now. You can think of each row as sort of a new feedback loop we're creating or a project that we're doing. I'll just go one by one for these. If we start at the top, data planning and management, by far the least glamorous of any of the items on this list, but arguably the most important, right? We can't do good evaluation work if we don't have the right data, if we have poor quality data. So there's ongoing efforts to make sure we have good data to do this work. Next, we have code, user, surveys, and interviews. The purpose here is to get some qualitative feedback from developers, from builders who are actually using the process on their experience with the code and the process. We've completed, we received about 70 surveys to date and done about 16 interviews, I think. We'll continue those throughout the summer until we get enough of those that we feel confident sharing out findings. I think that will be in the fall. We're aiming for at least 30 interviews. Next, we have the incentive analysis, which we'll speak to in great length tonight, so I'll skip for now. We have dashboards and reporting, so we're planning to publish a public-facing dashboard this summer with some data on the zoning code, things like what's getting approved, where, what type of development, what's using incentives, et cetera. And then in fiscal year 26, we're planning to create another dashboard that will show some key performance indicators for the zoning code, so I think that'll be really useful for you all. Next, we have the Boise State Housing Impact Study. The goal here is to try and understand what is actually the impact of the new zoning code on housing supply in Boise. Hopefully we see it's increasing housing supply, but it's a really complicated question to answer, right? Because there's so many factors at play that determine what gets built, right? Like market forces, like labor costs, materials costs, interest rates. And we don't have control over those. And so we partnered with Boise State to do a really rigorous statistical analysis of that. Trying to say, what is the impact of the zoning code on housing supply, separated out or untangled from those other factors. They're starting work this summer, but it's mostly just feasibility work to try and figure out what is the right methodology. Do they have access to the data they need to do that? They won't actually complete that analysis for another 2 to 4 years. And that's because it's going to take quite a bit of time to get enough data to actually to do that analysis well. And then finally, case studies. You know, so many of the conversations leading up to adoption of the zoning code were very much in the abstract, right? Like the zoning code says this, I think that means this will get built, and I like that or I don't like that. As we start to see more buildings getting built, things on the ground, buildings occupied, we want to do some case studies around those to understand the real world impacts, right? So you can imagine like a mixed use development on State Street. We'd love to look into what do neighbors think about that development, right? Is it impacting transit use for residents because they're on a transit node, to get some more concrete information about how these developments are performing. So that's the sort of global look at the work we're doing, but tonight we're going to really drill in on our financial analysis of incentives in the zoning code. And as I mentioned in the last slide, in a lot of cases, we just don't have enough data yet to know if the zoning code is working or not, right? It'll just take some time given the development cycle. The one element of the zoning code that I feel really confident we do have enough data to understand if it's working or not are these incentives for sustainability and affordability. Very few projects are using them, and anecdotally, many of those projects were going to build affordable units or build sustainably anyway, right? So it's not really resulting in the behavioral change that we want to see. And through conversations with developers and builders through the surveys and other forums, we're hearing things like, they don't work for me, they're not financially feasible for me. So we know they're not working in their current form, and we want to dig deeper into why that was and propose a path forward. In organizational effectiveness, we partner with other departments in the city to advance city goals. And this is a great example of that. Really was a team effort between the mayor's office, planning and development services. And then we did work with two external consultants, Rick Jacobus and Matt Ferris, who work with cities big and small across the country doing incentives analysis. And their expertise was super helpful in this project. The components of the analysis included stakeholder interviews, with developers, city staff, council leadership, and others to get some of that qualitative data about how things were going. The heart of the analysis was that financial feasibility analysis to understand, do these incentives actually pencil, right? For an incentive to work, the value of the incentive has to be more than the cost of what we're requiring. And is that actually the case? And then finally, they looked at some other potential incentives to see if other ones would be more valuable. Here's a look at the current incentives that we have right now with the zoning code. There's a lot of them. I won't go through all of them for the sake of time. I'm sure you don't want me to go through all of them one by one, but I'll share a couple rows here. The top row, you can see in R zones, typically you're only allowed to build up to a duplex by right, but we're saying we will allow you to build up to 4 units if you build sustainably, and you can see the definition there in that requirements column, or if you include affordability. So 1 of 3 units has to be affordable, or 2 of 4 units has to be affordable. And that's at 80% of area median income for a period of 20 years. And I'm realizing that I don't need glasses yet because I can still read all of this. And if you scroll down to the bottom, second to the bottom row, in an MX3 zone, so a mixed use zone, we're offering a 50% parking reduction if you build sustainably or use affordability. In this case, affordability is 25% of units at 60% of area median income. So you can see it varies quite a bit from incentive to incentive. In some cases, we're offering extra units. In some cases, we're offering a parking reduction. In some cases, requiring 80% AMI, sometimes 60% AMI. What we've heard is that can be confusing for folks to understand what applies where. Some just quick themes from the interviews that we did. First, we heard from folks who work in lots of different cities that Boise's code and our permitting process are actually easier than other cities. So it's nice to see that we're performing well relative to peers. Of course, that doesn't mean we're perfect. We always have opportunities for improvement. We can get better, but that's a positive sign so far. We heard that the value of incentives are not sufficient for requirements. So again, they're not really financially feasible. And then that the current incentives are confusing. There's a lot of them. They're inconsistent across the incentives. Some, like I said, some are 80%, some are 60%, et cetera. But this is really, again, the heart of the analysis, right? Because somebody can say something in the interview, but what do the numbers actually say, right? And so what we had our consultants do is a financial analysis on a set of hypothetical development types for what would it actually cost to do the requirement and what would be the value of the incentive, and is there a feasibility gap there? Right? Because an incentive only works, the value of the incentive is greater than the cost that we're requiring of folks. We did that calculation across different development types because every development, every site is different, every project's different. An incentive can be valuable in one context, but not another. And I draw your attention to the bottom row of this, which really is sort of the takeaway finding of it, which you'll see there's a feasibility gap in almost all cases, meaning that the incentives just aren't financially feasible. Folks are unlikely to use them. The feasibility gap can range in size from, on the lower end, if you see for the 6-plex and the affordability incentive, it's only a $31,000 feasibility gap. But if you go to the podium apartments for affordable, it's a $6.5 million feasibility gap. So this tells us folks are really unlikely to use these incentives in this situation. There is one exception. You can see in the bottom right in the green text, under podium apartments and sustainable, there's a $500,000 surplus, which means in that context, the incentives probably actually would work. And that's for 2 reasons. One, we learned that the sustainability incentive requirements are much less costly than the affordability requirements. So it's just easier to get that one. And also the cost of building parking in a podium building is just really, really expensive. And so a parking reduction in that context is really, really valuable, even if it's not so much in other contexts. Because we found that almost none of the incentives in their current form were super effective, we had the consultants explore a list of other incentives that might be valuable. This is just a short list. We had them look at a number of additional ones. But we picked things on this list based on what we heard from developers as being potentially valuable and what we've seen from other cities. I won't walk through the details and the findings in detail, but the key takeaway here is that no one incentive is probably sufficient to achieve the goals that we have to make it a good incentive. We'll probably need to stack incentives, so maybe offer multiple incentives for folks. There is one exception on this list, the property tax exemption, which turns out when we did the math, it's very, very valuable and could alone be enough to incentivize the kind of development we want. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that. We can't offer property tax exemption, though if state laws change in the future and we're able to do that, that's something we could offer and could be really valuable in the future. So based on what we learned, we're proposing a new approach to the incentives. So we learned that the value of incentives is insufficient to stimulate affordable and sustainable development, and we propose adjusting the incentive value and requirements to make them pencil without impacting the city's budget. So again, I'll use my hands, I'm sorry. For an incentive to work, right, the value has to be higher than the cost of the requirements. We're seeing right now it's the opposite. The cost is much higher than the value. To make it meet in the middle, we're probably going to have to both increase the value of incentives and reduce the cost of the requirements. So we're going to have to make changes to both sides of that equation. Second, we learned that incentives are confusing, making them hard to market to developers. We propose simplifying the incentive structure to increase understanding and use, and we're proposing doing that in two ways. One is just having fewer incentives, so collapsing some of the incentives together. So instead of like 7 or 8, it's 3, and then making them more consistent across the various incentives. And actually, just last week, I was talking to a current planner. I ran into him in the hallway, talking about things like, can you please make them less confusing? It's so hard to explain to folks. So I think that could be valuable. And then lastly, we learned that every site and project are different. A one-size-fits-all approach limits incentive effectiveness. So that podium apartment example, right, where you saw the parking reduction is incredibly valuable, but for another project, the parking reduction might be meaningless, right? So we're proposing creating a menu approach to maximize effectiveness, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that in a moment. But the idea here is rather than here's your one incentive, take it or leave it, here's a list of potential incentives you could use, and you maybe could even pick multiple of them to make sure you're choosing an incentive that makes the most sense for your project. Here are our proposed changes around affordability. So right now, for affordability, we require that units are 60% to 80% area median income. We're proposing changing that across the board to 80% area median income, and largely because that improves financial feasibility for the incentives. But also, they're still really valuable units for our community, right? 80% AMI is still below market rate for new construction, so they're valuable. And as rents rise over time in Boise, they're going to become even more attractive for folks. We propose changing the percentage of units that must be affordable from 25 to 50% is what it is now, and dropping that down to 10 to 25%, again, to improve financial feasibility. And then the bottom row is the one I'm most excited about. We're proposing increasing the duration. So the number of years a unit has to stay affordable from 20 years, what it is currently, to 50 years. And we're doing that because based on the math, based on conversations with developers, sort of the difference between 20 and 50 years isn't isn't a big difference in a cost perspective based on how they calculate sort of their net income. But obviously would have a huge impact on community benefit to hold onto units for an extra 30 years. That's a really big deal. And here's an example of that menu approach I was mentioning, right? And let me take a drink of water. So this is something that we might use, say, for mixed use zones and the compact urban zone, so R2, R3, MX zones. On the left side is the table of the community benefit. So if you're a developer, you're building something, you can choose which of those community benefits you want to offer with your development, sustainability, affordability, and based on what you offer, you get points. You can see points in that third column. So say I wanted to build something and make it both sustainable, but also 10% affordable, you would get 1 + 2 = 3 points. And you can spend those 3 points on the menu on the right side of this, right? So you could say, parking reduction is not that valuable to me, but I would really like to get the height increase and the minor land division. So I'm going to spend my 3 points that way. So it's a lot more flexible. You can choose the incentives that are the most valuable to you in your context. Here's another example of that same approach, but for R1 zones, so lower density residential zones. Again, you can choose to offer sustainability or affordability, and in exchange, you could choose from a list of incentives. As you can see, based on the context, we might offer different point values and offer different lists of incentives because those will vary by zone. And just one last point of clarification. Tonight, we're really talking about stuff on the left side of the screen, right? So we're saying we're going to require 80% area median income for these units. In exchange, we're offering zoning incentives, so land use incentives, things that don't cost the city any money, right? Parking reductions, height increases. We have and will continue to offer financial incentives at 60% of area median income. And so we do that through the Housing Land Trust, through gap financing, through fee waivers and deferrals, if you're willing to offer that deeper affordability. But for the zoning incentives we're talking about, we're really on the left side. So higher AMI, but things that don't cost the city money. So our next steps. So this summer, we're doing extensive targeted engagement and education with the community and also with developers and others. We expect to submit the zoning ordinance amendment application in August and then come back in October for a public hearing. So that completes my presentation. I'm happy to stand for any questions y'all have.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have two.
Commissioner Saya, you did just a hair, got the mic turned on.
Thank you for the presentation. So my first question is that you said you interviewed 7 or you spoke with 7 developers. Are those developers, are they more mostly large scale developers or do they do, or
Yes.
is it spread across?
It was a mix of large scale developers, some of whom operate in different cities, and some smaller like infill builders or developers. So we got a good mix between the smaller and the larger.
And then my last question goes back to the AMI. So if you go back where you identify the changes, so before it was like 60 to 80%, and now you're just looking at 80%. Has the city looked at the data? I mean, there's a need for workforce housing, but there's also there's a need for all kinds of housing.
Yes.
Right. And what we know is that workforce housing or anything below, like anything below, I would say 80%. Depending on who you talk to, folks would say that's where the need is. But have you guys looked at the data? Like, have you worked with some of the nonprofits to see like, okay, who are they helping? Where are they in the scale? Right? So I'm afraid, and this is just obviously my own opinion, I'm afraid that we're losing out on any opportunity to provide housing at a AMI percentage that really is slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So yeah, obviously our goal really is to be able to provide housing at all price points, right? And there's strategies at different price points. I think our strategy at this 80% AMI level is very much about zoning incentives. How can we do that through zoning incentives? At the 60% AMI, it's much more about financial investment by the city because you can't really make it work without financial investment. And even at the lower level, at 30% AMI level, really is often folks exiting homelessness. We have big investment in like permanent supportive housing and things of that nature. So we're being very intentional about having different strategies at different levels. But we do, to answer your question directly, we do every 3 years a housing community needs assessment. We're actually looking at like what percentage of the community is in each of those categories and where are the gaps. Not surprisingly, the biggest gaps are really at 60% AMI and below because the market just doesn't produce those units on their own. They need a lot of support, which is why it's so important. The city is, investing, I think, $65 million over 5 years in investing directly in affordable housing at that AMI.
Torres, I think you were next.
Yeah. Madam Chair. Kind of following up on that AMI question. So full disclosure, in my day job, I work at Jesse Tree. So I work as a housing navigator. So I help people below 80% AMI look for housing. And those 30 to 60% people, especially the people below 30%, as you mentioned, the market's just not building them. understanding this is just from the zoning code perspective, not the other incentives, but also acknowledging that there's a lot of uncertainty at the federal level right now with the
Yeah.
kinds of tax credits and programs that actually make those other units possible, basically. I guess my concern is we're going to see less of that stuff built regardless. I know it's not getting built right now, at least via the zoning code incentives, but I wonder, I guess I would say I am, just from my personal opinion perspective, concerned about the impact of making even fewer units like that available. Kind of piggybacking on that question, we've all seen the Boise Dev articles or the KTVB articles or the Statesman articles where you've got a million comments about a development that's not affordable. You know, I also worry that we might be seeing even more of that hostility to what affordable housing does get built, because they're not wrong, but they also, under the federal definition, they are wrong. So, you know, like that was a lot of commentary mixed in with a couple questions. So I guess I'll just
Yeah. Commissioner, thank you so much. Great questions. And I share your concern about how the federal funding landscape might impact that deeply affordable homes being developed, for sure. And I think I would love a reality where zoning incentives gets us enough that we can require folks to provide housing at 60% of area median income. I think that would be amazing. I think one of the clear findings from this is that it's just not going to get there. We can say you have to do 60% AMI and then nobody will use it, right? And so personally, I'd much rather us set the incentive at a level that will get us units our community needs, even if I'd prefer lower AMIs, than do an incentive that doesn't really get us anything. Thank you.
You're stalling.
Back to the interviewing developers,
Yeah.
development teams. Is this an opt-in or an invite-only process? Is there a way that they can say, I'd love to?
Yeah,
my
so
piece.
there's two separate pieces. For this specific component, the incentive analysis, we invited developers who we have talked to in the past about things, who have been good collaborators, and who we knew in the community were doing a lot of projects, right? There's some like infill folks who are like, oh, they've done a lot of projects, they would have a good insight. So that was more of an opt-in. I mentioned earlier that we're also doing interviews and surveys with folks who complete a permitting process. That's we send out a survey to everybody who completes their permitting process, whether or not their application was entitled, withdrawn, or denied. And anybody has an opportunity to provide feedback through that mechanism. And that's just a bigger set of questions about the process and the incentives and lots of other things. So there's opportunities in both cases.
Okay. And then just on the incentives with the large surplus on that
Yeah.
one slide about the sustainability surplus, $500,000 is pretty significant, obviously. Are the sustainable, is the request to not, like, could we be, I mean, not to say that we don't want to incentivize this, that's exactly, you know, that we got the green light there, right? But in that sense, is it, you know, could we do 18% energy efficiency or so, you know, or is that being
Yeah.
considered, or are we just trying to get the carrots like lined up at this point?
Yeah, it gets so complicated, right? Because you can make it data driven, you can do estimates, but again, if you're building that same building in a neighborhood over and a slightly different cell cost, then maybe it doesn't. So it's
Sure.
really hard to get
Yeah.
tuned in quite that well. I think the key with that is continuing to be iterative, right?
Mhm.
If we make these changes, we're going to get a lot of data in the first year of like, do people actually use them, right? I suspect they will, more so than in the past. But are there specific incentives that they're using a lot of and ones that they're not using more of? And maybe do we need to change those things a little bit? But we are also considering, you know, what might we sort of tweak the sustainability piece a little bit to include things like potentially like rooftop solar, things of that nature. So we are having conversations there. But it's all so complicated too, because not only is it different from site to site and project to project, but also the two incentives interact in a really complex way, right? Like typically how they work is a developer will pick the lowest cost requirement first, right? So sustainability is cheaper, so I'll do that and I'll take the most valuable incentive for that.
Mhm.
And then if you're going to do affordability, there have to be enough remaining incentives that are valuable enough to do affordability.
Mhm.
So if you start increasing the requirements around sustainability, then it might make it that sustainability still works, but then affordability won't work because the remaining incentives are valuable enough for that. So does that make sense? It's
Yeah.
like really, really complicated. I think the key is just understanding that we're never going to have this perfect.
Right.
We're going to use data to make it better. We're going to collect more data and see how it's working and maybe make changes in the future.
And last one for you.
Yeah, please.
Hopefully it's an easy one. On your menu system, maybe on that first slide you had up. So you get your points from your blue chart and then you cash them in, say. You couldn't do, or I guess to clarify, you couldn't take 2 bike parking reductions, or like you can do one option here.
Great question. That is, you could not do 2 bike parking reductions. You could choose to offer all of the community benefits. So in this case, you could get up to 5 points, but you can't like repeat a bike parking reduction. You get that only once.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I have one more question I just thought of, if that's
Commissioner
okay.
Torres.
If I can actually get this thing to stay on. Back to the AMI. You mentioned how obviously with the zoning, we're looking at increasing the AMI to 80%. And I don't know if this is relevant to your presentation or if you're able to answer this. Is the city looking at all at, on the other side, using more incentives to further incentivize that cheaper housing, or maybe even going lower than like 60 or 50? I mean, I know getting projects at like 30% AMI are really, really difficult.
Yeah.
But I do know there are a lot of people who are on, a lot of times Social Security, it's their only income. And that's really like, their rent, I mean, their income is less than $1,000 a month. And obviously the city can only do so much. The city has a budget. It has to be, everything has to pencil from the city's perspective and from the developer's perspective.
Yeah.
But just a.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Commissioner. Great question. I think what's great about these incentives is we're saying you can't do anything higher than 80% AMI, but if you're doing it lower, you still are eligible for the incentives, right? So if you're building at 60%, if you're building at 30%, you get these financial investment from the city, right? And also can utilize the incentives for your development. And I think that's what we're seeing, as many of the affordable developments that are going through the city are also using the incentives. I think Wilson Station, is that the name of it? An affordable development the city's investing in is using one of these, one of the existing incentives in the current code as part of it. So it's nice that if you're building at a lower AMI, you get financial investment plus zoning incentives.
More questions?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Yeah, I've got a couple. First of all, thanks. Back in May when we had the last ordinance amendment, I was the one that stuck my neck out and said, "Hey," because we hadn't really seen a whole lot of action on what are we doing with the ordinance as far as improvement. And then we found out, obviously, you guys are doing a lot, so thank you. And what I understand from Crystal and maybe Deanna told us at the last one was we've got topic based and we got continuous improvement. So this is topic based?
Correct. This would be the first, Commissioner, great question. Thank you. This would be the first topic-based code change. So coming after that continuous improvement one, which I think is going to council tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the one we heard a month ago, right? 083, I think, 25.3.
Correct.
So could you give us kind of a roadmap of what's coming up? So we got a kind of a sense of that. In particular, I'm really interested, since the code was so focused on encouraging that infill development and reducing sprawl.
Mm-hmm.
How are we tackling that? Is that a topic based one for later? If we look at how land use is being accounted for as we go through the process.
Yeah, if you could pull up the slide on the screen so everybody can see it. And Deanna, I might need to tap you in on this because this is really Deanna's work that I'm just taking credit for. And well, I'll just pass it to you, Deanna. You know this stuff better than I do.
Commissioner Mooney, good question. So I'm hearing a couple of things. One, you're asking what is the full list of future topic-based edits? And then you're specifically interested in kind of an understanding of sprawl and how, what is our current approach to annexation, I would think is maybe that. So our current policy topic list, I believe I did show this at one of our past meetings. It's kind of in flux right now. We've prioritized as the first one, the incentives, just because we have this body of work leading into the evaluation. And we hope to actually do some engagement around with the whole community in the fall to actually then help us prioritize that list for what would be our first topic-based one in 2026. So that's where we're at in terms of what's next for topic-based edits. I think your question around annexation is a good one that may not actually even fall within an evaluation of, what would we change in the zoning code, but really a policy discussion from our council about, lots of things go into decisions around annexation, cost of service. Do we have enough housing capacity within the city? What is the market providing? Does the market want to sprawl while we're asking for development within our downtown? So we're working on some planning projects that may not result in a change to the zoning code, but would help inform policy decisions. And we're in some very early stages of kicking that off to bring on a consultant to help us. We're calling it a housing capacity analysis. So because of the zoning code change, what's the capacity for new housing? And then, what percent of that capacity is the market willing to provide? Because we might be able to have zoned downtown to accommodate X thousands of units. However, the market is only going to build a 6-story building, and that's going to be 40 units per acre. Completely random numbers. So that's a planning project that will keep you guys in the loop as that moves forward.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking about Micron expansion, for example, and we got all that land south of the airport, and it's maybe if data drives this, and people say, "Well, look, we're sprawling." Well, maybe that's not really accurate. That we missed the ball on that. So, last question is, can you just give us a thumbnail? I've forgotten the numbers on how many units we need to do annually to kind of catch up, and how have we done? I know you've told us that before, so give it to me again.
Commissioner Mooney, I'm going to say what's been in my head is 2,300.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
That's the requirement, and we did last year. I know early in the code, so we didn't do as well.
1,800.
Okay, thanks.
And Commissioner Mooney, I just add that the vast majority of those are at the lower income levels, right? So we tend to produce at a higher income levels, but the units we need are at that 30, 60, 80% income level.
Any more questions?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Kyle, thanks. Appreciate it. Very good presentation. 2 questions. So when you were talking about the developers, I'm curious if they gave you any input or feedback on the density increases with the new code, and if they're finding that helpful or not to help reduce costs. And then second question is what's driving, so we're fighting cost, right? At the end of the day, like housing is expensive. What in our current market, what's driving that? Is it land cost? Is it material costs? Is it labor costs? Is it a combination of the 3?
I don't know if we got quite into that level of detail, so I'm not sure if I can answer that question well. Certainly there was a conversation about it, and I think the answer of your first question, that folks generally thought our zoning code was positive in that it makes it easier to develop the type of housing that our community needs. Okay. There's sort of pretty general consensus there. And on the cost piece, I don't think it was one thing, but we didn't really ask like which specific thing is the most important for it. But certainly we heard folks say things like, "Oh, I don't plan on building anything in the next 4 years here because of just the market environment is tough."
Right.
So a pretty clear message that we don't expect to see a lot of development soon.
Okay. Yeah, and that's my fear, right? Like, is this we're in a moment, right? We're in a moment where it's just really expensive. So certainly need to do everything we can to ease that burden. But, we look out or try and project out 10, 15, 20 years, what's the long play, right, with these incentives?
Yeah. And I think what's nice about, Commissioner, great question. What's nice about this is we don't have to set it and forget it for 20 years and just see what happens. We should be taking looks at it every year as the market changes. And we'll get good data from the first year if we make these changes and can continue to make those changes over time. I think, worst case scenario, if we're offering too much, we'll know in the first year, and it will hopefully end up just spurring more development that our community needs anyway. And we can always decide that, do we want to keep it there? Do we want to pull it back a little bit? But we can change it over time.
Right.
Any other questions?
Last one, Madam Chair.
All right. Commissioner Stalin.
With the interviews with the developers, kind of we were saying earlier, are we asking them, would these incentives, if it penciled, would these be the carrot that you would need? Like a parking reduction that sounds like a cost savings, because like you said, a podium parking garage is incredibly expensive. But if if the residents have to have parking anyway, if they can't move the units without the parking, they've got to, so is that,
Yeah.
are we asking them, are these the incentives that might help in better economic times, or are there other things? Is that part of the interview?
Yeah, the initial interview is really focused on the existing incentives. Are they working or not? Are those incentives right? And certainly we heard often that like the parking reduction isn't that helpful because I actually want to build more parking because I can market the units better. That's certainly part of the conversation. We plan on, so what we have here is all based on the data we have and the interviews we're going to do as part of our engagement this summer, going back to developers to say now, okay, we heard you. This is what you said might be useful. Would this actually work or not? And we can continue to make tweaks on it based on what we heard. But certainly it really depends on the developer and the project and who they're marketing to and all of those things. Thanks, Commissioner.
Well, thank you. And I've got a couple of questions myself. So I think one reduction that comes to mind for me that I didn't see up there was the EV charging. And I know that's kind of in a weird, is it going to be allowed later or not deal, but has that question kind of come up of using some incentives to reduce EV charging or some of those EV installed, EV capable deals?
Yes, we're definitely having the conversation. It's a unclear environment right now as to what to happen. And so it's hard to create policy based on that, but it's certainly part of the consideration. If in a future state we feel like we can't require EV chargers, we might include it in an incentive, but hard to say in the current state.
That's fair enough. And then the other question that I had was, I noticed the 50-year duration, and I remember when we were first reviewing the zoning code, it had the 50-year duration. And then I think in the city council review, it was revised to 20 years. And now we're looking at reverting it back. Has there been a conversation about the ping pong, for lack of a better term?
Yes. Madam Chair, yeah, it was initially written as 30-year duration. Council from the DAIA said that feels too long. We want more units. Let's go down to 20 units, which makes a lot of sense, right? And then, of course, now we're proposing 50 years. That was probably the biggest point of conversation when I had this presentation at council, is council members really just wanting more information about why that is, why that won't create problems, with a specific, I think, concern about smaller development. I think they sort of get it for like a large scale mixed use development, but if you're building a fourplex or something, or doing a minor land division, does that still make sense for you? I'm happy to, if it's helpful. As a result of that, we asked for our consultants to write a memo with some of the details behind what they heard, both here in Boise and from developers across the country, and some of sort of that real estate finance behind why that decision making is happening. But I expect it to be a continuing conversation throughout this summer with council about how we might do that. I think there was a specific ask from Councilmember Will. It's like, might we, for smaller developments, keep it at 20 years, and then for larger developments, go to 50 years?
Gotcha. That makes sense. And then I guess my last question is, I think for some of the, permanent supportive housing and things like that, there's incentives like fast track permit review. You kind of get bumped to the front of the line essentially for a building permit review. Is that going to continue on those lowest points? Are you talking about incentives for some of the 80 AMI areas, or just for the 60 and below?
Yeah, Madam Chair, great question. We are talking about that. I think if we did that, it would be outside of the zoning code. So it wouldn't really be a zoning code change to allow that fast tracking. It would be more of a policy decision. So we're having internal conversations about whether or not that makes sense. Again, trying to calibrate the right amount of incentive for what folks are offering to us. But that's certainly a potential option.
Sure. Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? No other questions? Well, thank you very much for your presentation and all the information. We look forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kyle. We really appreciate that. We can move right into agenda review, and then if there's some time left over, you can stretch and everything before this arduous hearing that we have before us. Okay, so we have no minutes to accept this month. So we start right off at item 1. This is going to be a mouthful, so just hang tight with me. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 applications associated with item 1. It's CUP 25-3, CVA 25-5, CPA 25-2, CAR 25-4, and Sub 25-13, all addressed at 2626 South Maple Grove Road. That's a conditional use permit to exceed the 5 units per acre density limit outlined in the code for the B1 airport influence area. A variance to deviate from the streetscape standards and access and connectivity requirements. A comprehensive land use amendment to change the land use from industrial to suburban. A rezone of approximately 3.9 acres from R1A AIO, or residential large lot with airport influence area overlay, to R1C, residential traditional with airport influence area overlay zone. And then a preliminary plat for residential subdivision comprised of 19 buildable and 2 common lots on 3.4 acres in that proposed R1C AIO zone. We are recommending approval. We have not heard any comments of opposition, and so we can try for consent on that. I'll pause for questions because that was a lot.
Is that a record?
In my tenure, yes, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben's just going all in on
And
one
there was an
applicant.
associated ROS with it
Awesome.
too, which is an admin one. So that was everyone be nice to Dave tonight. Okay. Item 2 is SUB 24-4, Joyful Subdivision. This one is addressed at 2311 South Curtis Road. And it's a prelim plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 13 buildable and 1 common lots on 4.4 acres in an R2 AIO, or residential compact with airport influence area zone. This one is a redo of one that was didn't get extended in time. So this was already approved in 2020, coming back through. We are recommending approval and did not receive any letters of opposition. So we can try for consent on item 2 as well. Item 3 is CUP 2511 for K&M Engineering. It's at 801 East Reserve Street. And it's conditional use permit for a religious institution on 4.9 acres in an MX1 DA, or mixed use neighborhood with development agreement zone. Yes, you are correct. This is the Armory. We are recommending approval, but we did get some public opposition, so we will be hearing that one this evening. Maybe one day the Armory will get something in there. Item 4 is CUP 25-8 and CVA 25-9 for Hutchinson Smith Architects. This was deferred from June 2nd, and the CVA has since been withdrawn. We have to keep it on the listing because the notice went out with it on there. They withdrew after, so that's why that's there. So sorry for the confusion. This is addressed at 2205 East Old Penitentiary Road. And this is a modification to a conditional use permit to construct an addition to the Idaho State Historical Society Library and Archive Building located on 232.35 acres in an A1 HSO WUIO, or open land, very low density with hillside development overlay and wildland urban interface overlay. A variance to deviate, that variance is gone, so never mind. We are recommending approval on this one since we did not hear any opposition. However, Commissioner Doan will have to say a little something before we build the consent agenda, just because her business is associated with some of the work there. So just make sure you give her a pause to put that on the record before we finalize the consent agenda.
Will do.
Any questions, my friends?
So for the withdrawal, I just have to, after I read the description, just have to say it's just been withdrawn.
Yeah,
That's
just
it?
like I
Okay.
said, it was withdrawn after the noticing, so that's why it's still on the legals, but it is no longer before the commission.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, you got 11 minutes to run free. See you in 10. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing. A few things to start out with tonight, or for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing virtually has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you'll be called upon and unmuted. There is a chat function in Zoom. However, this is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. Our procedures for public hearings begins with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who are in person, then who signed up on the sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you're attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Crystal. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by city council. We make final decisions on conditional use permits, variances, and appeals, and recommendations to the city council on subdivisions, rezones, annexations, and code or comprehensive plan amendments. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to the city council, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. So that's why it's important to give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees to the staff report and if there's no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order just detailed a few minutes ago with staff, applicant, neighborhood association, and then the public testimony. Thank you all for attending tonight. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Stanley. Moore.
Here.
Schaefer.
Here.
Mooney.
Here.
Seha.
Here.
Torres.
Here.
Doan.
Here.
Stallings.
Here.
7 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. So first, we'll start with the consent agenda. And we'll start at item number 1. That's going to be a few items, so bear with me. It's CUP 25-003.
I need to speak to the consent agenda item.
Commissioner Doan, you can wait until the item
Okay.
is over.
Thank you.
Start that. So item number 1 is CUP 25-0003 and CVA 25-5. CPA, or that's a conditional use permit to exceed the 5 units per acre density limit of the B1 airport influence area on 3.9 acres in a proposed R1C AIO zone for a residential subdivision. Also included is a variance to deviate from the streetscape standards and access and connectivity requirements. We have CPA 25-2, comprehensive land use amendment to change the land use from industrial to suburban on 3.9 acres in a proposed R1C AIO zone. CAR 25-4, rezone of approximately 3.9 acres from R1A AIO residential large lot with airport influence area overlay zone to R1C residential traditional with airport influence overlay zone. And then finally, SUB 25-13, a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 19 buildable and 2 common lots on 3.4 acres in a proposed R1C AIO zone, all at 2626 South Maple Grove Road. Is the applicant present today? And do you agree with the terms and conditions of staff report? Let the record show that they agree. And is there anybody here virtually or in person who wishes to testify in opposition of item number 1 tonight? Seeing none in person and none online, we'll place item number 1 on the consent agenda. Next up for consent agenda is item number 2. That's SUB 24-4, Joyful Subdivision. That's at 2311 South Curtis Road. It's a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 13 buildable and 1 common lot on 4.4 acres in an R2 AIO residential compact with airport influence overlay zone. And is the applicant present tonight?
Madam Chair, they are online.
And do you agree with the terms and conditions in the staff report?
Yes, we do.
Let the record show that they do. And is there anybody in person or online that wishes to testify in opposition to item number 2 tonight? Seeing none, I'll place item number 2 on the consent agenda. Moving on to item number 4, CUP 25-8 and CVA 25-9, Hutchinson Smith Architects. And then CVA 25-9 has been withdrawn. It was withdrawn after noticing went out, so it will not be heard tonight. Those are at 2205 East Old Penitentiary Road. Is modification to a conditional use permit to construct in addition to the Idaho State Historical Society Library and Archive building located on 232.35 acres in an A1 HSO WUIO, open land, very low density with hillside development overlay and wildland urban interface overlay. Commissioner,
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Doan?
With respect to the agenda item number 4, CUP 25-8, I am the Business and Support Management Manager at the Idaho Transportation Department. In that role, I manage the State Street campus, including the lease of the current Idaho State Historical Society storage that this will be moving to. That it's currently at that campus. I don't have a role with respect to the current application before the commission tonight, and I do not believe that it would impact me, my impartiality or objectivity with respects to this decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Doan. And is the applicant present tonight? And are you in agreement with the terms and conditions in the staff report? Right, we'll let the record show that they are in agreement. And is there anybody in person or online that wishes to testify in opposition to item number 4? Seeing none, we'll place item number 4 on the consent agenda, and I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Schaefer,
I move to approve the consent agenda with the following items, 1, 2, and 4 from tonight's agenda with all of their respective terms and conditions of their staff reports.
thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Commissioner Doan. Any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Moore,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Mooney,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
Torres,
Yes.
Doan,
Yes.
Stallings,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right, thank you. Good luck with your projects. So moving into our only topic to hear tonight, we have item number 3. This is CUP 25-11. It's KM Engineering at 801 East Reserve Street. It's a conditional use permit for a religious institution on 4.9 acres in an MX1 DA mixed use neighborhood with a development agreement zone. And we'll start with staff.
Madam Chair, if I may, I just wanted to say this is Doug's debut at P&Z, so please feel free to test him out.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so good evening, commissioners. Before you tonight is a conditional use permit for a religious institution in the MX1 zone off of Reserve Street at the former National Guard Armory site. Did want to note for the record that it was noticed with an acreage of 4.9 acres, but the site is 4.78 acres, which is reflected throughout the project report that you all received. The request will reuse the existing 2-story armory building since the building is 2 stories. Code does not require a mix of uses. However, a cafe will be open to the public as part of the proposal. There is an existing development agreement on the site, which will be discussed in further detail later in the presentation. There will be 244 parking spaces to serve the site. This includes both restriping the existing parking lot and adding additional parking spaces. New parking spaces will be located along the perimeter of the site in the darker gray as seen on screen. As summarized in the project report, an amenity space will be provided between the building and Reserve Street. 2 pedestrian connections are proposed, and a recommended condition of approval will require a 3rd connection to the east from Avenue H to the building across the parking lot. The existing development agreement is from CAR 12-9. It includes a conceptual facade treatment for the existing armory, which will be further reviewed in a subsequent design review application. But the DA also contains standards for future building locations on the site, but no additional buildings are currently proposed. This application did receive 1 comment in opposition as late correspondence. The comment cited concerns with the alignment of Blueprint Boise and the East End Neighborhood Plan, along with concerns around connectivity, a lack of housing, and a lack of multiple uses. As summarized in the late correspondence memo, the City of Boise cannot require housing as part of this application. Furthermore, Blueprint Boise and the East End Neighborhood Plans are guiding documents to help identify how development should occur. The proposal does align with multiple policies, goals, and principles and action items in both plans, as discussed in depth in the project report. In conclusion, the planning team recommends approval, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Benson. And now, is it Exton?
Yes,
Okay,
Exton.
awesome. Now we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, planning and zoning commissioners. My name is Elizabeth Kekritz. I am with Givens Pursley, 601 West Bannock Street, right over here. With me today is Riley Vermeer. He is part of our church development team, and he'll be able to answer any questions that I'm unable to. I want to start out by thanking staff. As always, it's such a pleasure to work in Boise. It's a great staff. It's a professional staff. They know what they're doing. Occasionally we disagree, but we usually get to where we need to be. So I'd like to thank you for that. Going through this first, I believe you're likely all aware of where the Armory is located, but we are adjacent to Fire Station number 1 and across from the Boise Bike Park. There's also assisted living, the Shaw Mountain of Cascadia, and townhomes are located across Avenue H, and there are some multifamily apartments to the rear across Logan Street. The future land use map designates this parcel and the adjacent fire station as mixed use on the future land use map. And mixed use property is described as a land use that generally includes retail, commercial, office, restaurants, residential, and live work units. And we also, when looking at this property, really do consider it part of that sort of greater Fort Boise area with the military reserve right there, the bike park, the ball fields, the senior center, the VA. There's an assortment of federal buildings tucked in back there, and St. Luke's, all sort of in the direct vicinity of this development, making it a really multi-purpose, multi-use area. The property is zoned MX1, and it's surrounded here, as you can see, by a variety of zones, including R2, R3, and A1. The MX zone is intended to provide opportunities for a mix of neighborhood serving, small-scale commercial, industrial, and residential uses. And what we are proposing on the property is really 3 uses. The primary use would be the religious institution use, but there will also be, as these are the River House headquarters, there'll be office space for 20 to 25 staff. And then there is a small coffee shop that's going to be open to the public during their regular hours. With that, as I'll talk in a minute, all of the programming is open to, the majority of the programming is open to the public. So this really does become a place that people can go, also within this neighborhood with all of these other surrounding uses. We do believe the religious institution use is well situated for this iconic but very, very deteriorating building. Most of you know some of the history of the Armory building. It was originally completed in 1937, used as a National Guard facility. It was no longer really in much use by 1971. The city acquired it in 1996. It's been proposed for a wide variety of uses since then, but none of those have come to fruition, and it's been vacant for over 30 years, likely much, much longer. Here on the bottom, you can't tell in this picture, but this bottom picture is the picture that shows some of the graffiti that's on there. It's a really dilapidated and structurally unsound building. We think that's one of the reasons why it hasn't been updated in years. The improvements, before they can even start to get to improving it for their own religious services use, is they have to do the roof, windows, and a myriad of other improvements. The back corner of the building was originally stables. So there's essentially a concrete shell, but no structure underneath. And so they have to build that structure. And that's going to cost, just to get it to the point where they start working on their own interior improvements, it's over $1 million, which is why we believe this has sat vacant for so long. Of course, we'll be adding sidewalks, trees, restriping the parking lot, as mentioned. It does meet all setbacks and city dimensional requirements. One of the things that was talked about is that we are overparked compared to what code would require. However, that is done somewhat on purpose, as River House recognizes that most of their congregants do drive to the site still, but also the neighborhood was most interested in having less of an impact on the neighborhood than some sort of high density residential would have in this location. And so this really does help minimize that impact on the neighborhood. You can see here some of the improvements that are going to be made. The green is the sidewalk where it's not wide enough along Reserve will be widened and brought into compliance. The red are 5-foot sidewalks throughout that will also be brought into compliance. Some are pre-existing, some are not. There are bike lanes. There's quite a few sort of pedestrian improvements throughout here. They are proposing 3 floors of improvements, including there is a basement that will include offices and some flex storage areas, the mechanical units. The main floor, which you can see here, includes the worship space, classrooms, offices, restrooms, a couple multi-purpose rooms, and importantly, that small cafe bar for both the congregants and for the public. And then the second floor, which is in your packet, also includes a couple more additional multi-purpose flex rooms. You can really see that this truly is a reuse of the existing building. Nothing on the outside is being changed other than those improvements necessary to bring the building up to current safety standards. And so it really seamlessly integrates into the neighborhood the way it has for years. The use is quiet and it's minimally intrusive. But it also brings a use that's in low supply in the area. There are very few churches and houses of worship in the East End. Not only, this is the view from Reserve and Avenue H now, not only is the building used on Sundays, but there's also regular, especially weeknight programming with between 30 to 70 members attending, which is also nice that that's also off-peak hours. It's not directly competing with rush hour. And of course, as I mentioned, most of these activities are open to the public. And then there'll also be the staff members there. So there'll be someone there activating it on a daily basis, making sure the property is getting used. The only real improvement or the only change to the facade, which will be discussed at design review, is that there is going to be a small parapet placed in this location on Avenue H and Logan that will hide the HVAC systems that have to be installed on the roof. And here you can see the view from Logan and the cell tower. We do believe this use meets all CUP criteria as outlined in your staff report. We meet the comprehensive plan and other adopted policies. This is a mixed-use site. This, quite honestly, the site is designated as a community center. This is really as close to a community center as you're going to get with a privately held piece of property. The city did own this property up through 1996, up through 2012 when it was traded away. And so this really is to have a community center, to have something there that is welcoming to the community is something that's really great right here. That has since it's just been stood vacant. There are no material negative impacts on the surrounding areas. The site is large enough to accommodate the use. We promote and support active transportation, does not adversely affect the delivery of services. ACHD weighed in, they have no problems with this. It's not in conflict with the comprehensive plan. There's minimal conflicts between pedestrians, bicycles, vehicular traffic, that sort of thing. And finally, we are in agreement with all conditions of approval except for number 4, which provides that the applicant must provide 16 EV-capable parking spaces. They're not intending on digging up any of the sidewalks, any of that frontage right along the building to install these sort of EV-capable parking spaces is extremely expensive. And it also results in the loss of additional parking spaces because these spaces are so much larger. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't even really make sense here. This is not housing development. It's not a full office. This is not like, there may be the occasional person charging, but this is not something where people are charging their vehicles the same way that you would at your own home. And then finally, we do believe, and you never want to get into this at a public hearing, but we do believe that this ordinance has been preempted by state law that provides that you cannot have, here, I'll just show you here, that you cannot have any ordinances that have anything to do essentially with requiring upgraded electrical conduct or other infrastructure for the purpose of EV charging stations. And so for that reason, we would ask, because it doesn't make sense in this area, because it just, it's not a place where people are going to be charging their vehicles, because of the significant expense of this, we would ask that we not be asked to provide those. And with that, we would request conditional use permit approval.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Kirkwood. Is there anybody representing the neighborhood association, either online or in person? Yeah, Kevin Fritz? No? All right. Well, next we'll move on to questions from the commission. Any questions? Anybody would like to start us off?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Torres.
my question is for the applicant. So it was noted in both the staff report and I think in the late correspondence, I don't remember if it was there as well, that I don't have the exact spot in front of me, I apologize, but I believe it's over 200% overparked. Understanding your explanation that you gave during your presentation, and also that the city doesn't have a parking maximum. This is being built in one of the denser neighborhoods in town. Was there any thought, obviously you're opening a new church. Was there any thought of trying to basically, instead of building all that parking, try to cultivate new parishioners who might be interested in biking to the location instead, or walking or some other means of transportation? And I'll just
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Torres, absolutely. I mean, they're building this church with the hope of growing and expanding and having a bigger footprint here, sort of in the downtown east north end, sort of on this side of town. And so absolutely, there is hope to continue to grow and continue to expand that, and to have people who can walk to church, then have a picnic on the grassy area, and then go to the bike park, to just do all the things that you can do in this neighborhood.
Madam Chair, a follow-up?
Please.
Okay. So if that's the case, why so many parking spots? As I'm sure any pedestrian or cyclist can tell you, crossing parking is not fun. Crossing a giant parking lot is not fun. So by having that large of a parking lot, you definitely are discouraging some of that use, even if there is pedestrian accessibility elsewhere on the site. People are going to end up having to walk across that parking lot at some point, in some cases. So I guess I'll just follow up. I kind of am repeating my question, but All
right. Thank you. Chairman Moore, Commissioner Torres. I think a big part, this is a pre-existing lot. And so much money is already being spent in getting this building up and going that there really isn't money. Like, if it wasn't a parking lot, it would have to be dug up at greater expense and turned into grass, and there certainly isn't money to dig it up and build another building. And so it really is looking at what's there and using what's there right now for the best purpose that they have.
One more,
please.
Okay. I believe in the late correspondence there was talk about housing. I know you showed the history of the property on the slide. I'm familiar with the history of the property. I know that it's been a long battle to get something into this building. I understand that. I know the city can't force housing into this property, but was there any look at doing some kind of YIGBY project? For those who don't know, that's Yes in God's Backyard, on the site, especially I mean, I won't bring up the parking lot again, but thank you.
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Torres, I do not believe there have been specific discussions about that. That's something that maybe in the future could be explored. But at this point in time, the focus has really been on getting this conditional use going in this location, this religious institutional use.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Stallings.
On the EV charging, you know, you mentioned that these are larger stalls. The infrastructure is costly. It works towards a future that we may need that infrastructure, and I believe that's why it's part of the code, right? But we have such excess in parking, it's hard to say. It limits the amount of parking because the stalls are larger. It is a mixed use lot. What about the people, the, you know, consumers of this cafe that may need, you know, to charge while they're there? You know, that's hard to see if it's just for Sunday to not need them for that specific use. It is a mixed use. So how does that balance the mix of uses with that?
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Stallings, the church looked long and hard at the parking, and there were many discussions about the parking, and they actually were trying to they've been looking at needing more parking. They know how many people come to their services. They're really trying to do as the least amount of impact on the neighborhood as possible so that they can fit into this neighborhood and really not be a detriment, really not disturb the neighbors. And they believe they need all of these spaces plus more, that there's still going to be some, but less surface street parking. And that when you look at the two and you weigh the two on how often people charge when they get coffee versus when people charge is when they're either at work long-term or they're spending the night, they're at their residence. And that it just didn't seem to make sense here and now, especially given the significant cost in digging up the sidewalk and installing it. And given the fact that there's now a state law that talks about it.
Madam Chair, follow up.
Please.
To the, you know, as Commissioner Torres said, 200% overparked. This large asphalt lot that we'd be looking at, the heat absorbency that we lose with that covered in that one use for occasionally maxed out stalls, right? You mentioned the evening and night uses at 70 to 80 participants. That's definitely within the required parking amount, right? So is there a surplus of greenscape and a shade canopy plan that goes along with this? Is there anything that compensates for kind of the eyesore and then the energy inefficiency of such a wide, vast parking lot for mostly used on Sundays, right?
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Stallings, really good question. There actually is. In order to keep the green grassy area, we had to receive a special exemption already from the city because we exceed the green space on mixed use property. So we're already in excess of what is typically allowed there. Plus there'll of course be all the additional trees that are being planted. There are trees on those islands. There's going to be significant trees planted along Logan Street. There's been quite a bit of back and forth with the arborist, the city arborist, and the River House's arborist, the prior owner, because it is expensive to take care of these properties, didn't water last summer. And so now we're out trying to save the trees that are still there to try to make them as tenable and viable as possible. But it already has more green space than would typically be allowed if this was not a pre-existing property.
Madam Chair.
Please.
And then just one last thing with the mixed use property, you mentioned the cafe will be open during normal business hours. It looks like it doesn't have its own entrance, so just wanted some clarification on that first floor plan. Then is that whole vestibule open? And is that commercial space and it's always available? Is there any signage or anything to bring that in? Or how do people know that there's a cafe in there without our knowing the facility already?
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Stallings, it would be open through the vestibule at the hours that it's open. And I would ask Mr. Vermeer, he could answer what the sort of hours and more notification about that would be for the public, what sort of signage could be located there.
Yeah, we'll have signage. I think obviously.
If you could
Come on
come
up,
up to the,
Commissioners.
thank, and
Commissioners,
your name and your address, please.
Riley Werner, 1307 East Lone Creek Drive.
Yeah.
Commissioners, yeah, it yet to be determined the exact hours of the coffee shop. It'll depend on the hours of the office space and who's occupying it. It'll be open throughout the week. There's weekly meetings from mornings, some afternoons, some evenings that will occur. And the coffee shop will be open. The exact hours we don't have yet. We'll have signage. We want the neighbors to learn the building and to learn how to access the space. And with any new building, it comes learning how it works and how it functions. And I think there'll be visibility on the outside indicating the cafe hours and welcoming the public. We just haven't made all those smaller decisions yet. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to follow up
Sure.
on Commissioner Stallings.
Commissioner Seha.
It's hard to determine the approximate square footage for that cafe because the planning report calls it a cafe, but if you look at the plans that you guys have provided in the application, it looks like it's just a little coffee stand. So do you have, I mean, what's the size of this? It looks rather small on the map.
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Seha, it's not a large space. It is more of a coffee, just sort of the coffee counter, barista, baked goods, just a few like items there. It's not a large space, but it is a space there. There'll be a little bit of seating, places to hang out, like a little bit of seating along the coffee area. I don't have those. I could find out what the exact dimensions are here, but it'll take me a minute.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Schaefer, just barely.
Beat Joan by a second. Liz, thanks. Couple questions. You said 20 to 25 staff working at the facility. That's just normal working hours.
That's correct.
Okay.
Plus Sundays.
Plus Sundays. Perfect. And then hours of worship Sunday mornings.
I believe it is Sunday mornings.
Okay. And is there a midweek as well?
There are some, and I'm going to ask Riley to step back up to talk about the actual day-to-day program.
You got it.
Commissioner Schaefer, currently we lease the Vineyard building on Jinden, and since they meet in the mornings, we meet in the evenings. And so when we occupy this, our plan is to have a morning service on Sunday mornings. We may also retain the evening service, yet to be determined. And then, yeah, we have weekly programming. We have a youth group that meets on Tuesday nights. We have prayer gatherings on a few different times each week, one morning, one afternoon, and one evening. And then the staff are in their, regular working hours throughout the week. The space will definitely be activated throughout the week.
Okay, great. And then how big, I appreciate that. Thank you. And how big are those, like the youth group? Like just how many people estimate?
If I was the youth pastor, I could tell you, but not. Let's say 40.
Okay.
60. Sorry, I'm being corrected. There's 60 youth.
Okay, and you said those are evenings?
Yeah, those are Tuesday nights.
Tuesday evenings, okay.
So off-peak hours again. Obviously, kids have to be out of school. Parents are off work, and they're bringing the kiddos to the church.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay. And then I noticed too in the floor plan, several classrooms, notably on the south side there.
Yeah.
Are those is that more of just like sort of like Bible study during Sunday morning service, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we'll do Bible studies or different educational classes like before service. Right now, we meet at 4 p.m., so we'll do classes at 3 p.m. at the Vineyard. I imagine we do something similar, whether it's before service or after service. And then we do midweek education as well, different types of leadership trainings amongst the core members and the elders within the church. But we have a lot of different purposes for that's one of our biggest needs right now is classroom space off the Sunday gathering, just because yeah, we have a lot of demand for those. So that's why you can see there's quite a few multi-purpose spaces within the building.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Question for staff. On the accessible parking spaces, that's obviously a condition of approval. But I guess this is a question for staff, maybe even the staff attorney. As a religious institution, I was trying to do some research. I'm trying to get better about understanding this, but does that apply an ADA requirement to a religious institution?
Yes, commissioners, it does. The ADA requirements are applicable to every kind of development of this nature, both commercial, religious institution, mixed use. It's pretty standard.
Question for applicant then. Does the applicant agree with that?
Chairperson Moore, Commissioner Mooney, I believe that's because we do not object to the ADA spaces. We
Okay,
think
great.
that's absolutely appropriate.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Sorry. Doug, what's triggering this? What's triggering the CUP?
Commissioners, so the conditional use permit is triggered just due to the nature of the use. Religious institution requires a conditional use permit, and I believe every zone in our code, at least a majority of them, specifically the
It's just
MX1
the
zone.
use, even though we're in a mixed. What
Mhm.
MX1.
is MX1? Interesting. Okay. All right.
Mhm.
That's great. Thanks.
Madam Chair, follow up on that.
Commissioner Mooney.
Yeah, so when I was looking at another thing, so when we look at the table of allowed uses for a religious institution, starts on the left to right, starts residential or and then goes across, comes to MX1 through 5, and then goes over to industrial. Obviously, on the left side of that table, it's a conditional use for all the residential zones, and then we get to MX1, and it's also conditional, kind of implying that we want to make sure that it goes through the process in residential areas, implying that MX1 is kind of a residential area, which I think speaks to the written testimony that we got in opposition to this, saying we need housing. So could you talk to that and how the city's approaching that opposition?
Yeah, I would love to, commissioners. So the MX1 zone is mixed use neighborhood. So the intention of that zone is really to have, these smaller neighborhood scale mix of uses, neighborhood serving. So in the zoning code, it imagines a lot of, alternative transportation, whether that's walking, biking, micromobility, things like that to meet those needs. So that's, like you mentioned, kind of part of that logic there. And is there anything else, Crystal? You don't mind me asking? Okay, yeah. I believe I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Follow up again, which is the code also requires active use for MX1, but is that for a new structure? And that kind of goes into that in the staff report. You talked about an existing versus a new build. It sounds like a new build, we want to see 60% of the ground floor activated. We can't do that here because it's an existing building. Is that accurate?
That is, yes. Yes, with it being an existing structure, there's some aspects that are able to be met and some that aren't, just the way the code operates for those standards in the mixed use zones.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I've got a few. So I think, state law about EV parking aside, it's kind of a weird thing. There's in the civil drawings that I'm seeing, there's a whole strip of new asphalt going in. The EV parking, is there a hardship of putting the EV parking in that location where there's already new asphalt going in? There's kind of already some work going in. It looks like there might be a drainage swale or something going in there.
Chairperson Moore, could we go back to that picture? And will you show me exactly where you're pointing?
So on the very south side of the property, I'm seeing yeah, that area right in there. It looks like new asphalt on the Civil Key.
Chairperson Moore, on the key, there is some new asphalt there, but it's mostly that's showing where the new parking areas are going to be. That's what that was. But it still is extremely expensive. Even with putting in, there will be some new curb going up there, but even with that, it still is very expensive.
And then a question for staff. What is the 16 spaces calculated off of? Is it calculated off of the new parking or off of the total parking? I know we went through this whole question before, so I'm sorry about that.
Chairperson Moore, the 16 parking spaces is calculated based off of the new parking spaces that are being added to the site. Additionally, let me get to it really quick. There is in our code EV parking adjustments that are available. So the applicant can submit documentation showing that the cost of installing EV parking spaces would exceed 10% of the total project cost to the planning director, and the planning director has the authority to adjust those.
Okay.
Oh, and they did not submit that EV parking adjustment, by the way.
Sure. Okay. And then the other item that I had, so it says most of the programming is open to the public, and I think there was a little bit of kind of discussion about this in the packet, but it's kind of unclear if it's just the programming that's kind of open to the public or if it's the rooms kind of like a community center or something like that. Is it more of like that? What exactly is open to the public and how does that work?
Chairperson Moore, it is generally the programming is open to the public.
Okay, sure. And then a question for staff. I know on the DA, there looks like there's an image, there's an elevation that's got kind of a pretty cool looking rooftop patio deal. With that not proposed in the programming, that doesn't trigger a development agreement modification or anything like that?
Chairperson Moore, so with the conceptual elevation that's shown on screen, that is Exhibit C within that development agreement, the applicant would be required to abide by that conceptual elevation, including some of those treatments on site, and that would be handled at the design review stage. If they wanted to deviate from that, that would be the route to deviate from that would be a development agreement modification. But the design was not reviewed as part of this application since there'll be that subsequent design review application.
Okay. And the development agreement, it's just elevations. There were no kind of conceptual floor plans in there. I don't remember. Okay.
No, there were no conceptual floor plans part of it, just mostly the facade protection for the Armory building.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, that's all my questions. And one last call for questions.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Schaefer.
We were on the same wavelength there. Doug, can you confirm for us, so the condition on the EV parking is EV ready, EV capable? There's layers to that, right? So what are we telling them to put in?
I believe it is EV capable with it. I know I believe it's EV capable.
And that means running conduits to identify where you're going to put EV parking in the future at a later date, run the conduits. That's all that they're required to do right now under this condition.
And it is, just also want to note that pretty much all uses that aren't residential are required to have that EV parking. So yeah.
So follow-up question, and I know we've been over this probably too many times already on other projects, but they agree to the condition, they run the conduits, they can stripe the lot standard currently, but then in the future, when they have to put in the EV chargers, then they have to restripe the lot per the EV parking stall dimensions.
Commissioners, I believe that is correct. Yes. Until there's a charger installed, it can function as a standard parking space.
Great.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schaefer, if I may, the dimension and design that is outlined those larger spaces in the code. It's not written completely clearly, so it is confusing to a lot of folks. They're not required to be larger spaces. Those are for the EV accessible spaces.
Gotcha.
And so that is something that's getting tidied up in our continuous improvements. But these can just be standard spots that have the wiring.
Love it. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
On the EV capable parking question for staff, to follow up on Commissioner Schaefer, as appointed officials, we got to apply the code here. So, but do we have the flexibility to comply with the applicant's request of removing that condition?
Commissioners, the only path forward with reducing EV parking to 0 would be a variance.
Thank you.
Or, and just to tag on to that, the other option would be to not add additional parking spaces, correct?
That'd be correct.
Okay. Perfect. Any other questions? Last call, seeing none. All right. We will now move up to, there's nobody on the sign up sheet. So if there's anybody in person or online that would like to testify, we'll start with in person. Come on up. If you'll state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Javier Muriel. My address is 604 North, San Felipe Drive. I live in Aldape Heights, just above the Armory site. I'm here to express my opposition to CUP 25001. While I appreciate this effort to rehabilitate the building, this proposal does not reflect the intent of Boise's mixed-use zoning or the long-standing vision laid out in Blueprint Boise and the East End Neighborhood Plan. Although the application presents the project as mixed use, nearly all 30,000 square feet are dedicated to church-specific functions. The so-called public cafe is only 16 by 3 feet, just 48 square feet. That is not a meaningful public amenity. At the February 19 neighborhood meeting at the downtown public library, the applicant stated that all office space would also be used exclusively by the church. This confirms that the site is not intended for diverse or public-facing tenants. The Armory was identified as a rare opportunity to celebrate a community-serving space, a mix of housing, retail, education, and civic uses that would be open to all. This proposal restricts that potential by allowing a single-use religious institution to take over a historically significant and strategically located site. If I recall correctly, we also heard at that meeting that many of the church's congregants live in Meridian and Garden City. If that is the case, this proposal would introduce increased traffic and weaken activity to a Boise neighborhood without providing corresponding benefits to its residents. Finally, I strongly object to the removal of healthy evergreen trees number 14 through 17 and 19 and 20. These trees are listed in good condition in the applicant's arborist report and should be preserved. This project does not meet the goals of a true neighborhood activity center. I respectfully ask the commission to deny CUP 2500011. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in person? Come on up. Please keep coming on up once you're done, and state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Deanna Smith, 1208 East Jefferson Street, Boise, Idaho. I'm here to make some requests of you to try and add some conditions. I agree with the previous person that this does not fulfill mixed use or even come close to a neighborhood activity center. But I'm assuming that despite that, it's probably going to become approved. It's not mixed use in any way. It's a single use. I know they built in some supposed public spaces, but even as an infill mixed use, this particular use is not needed in our neighborhood. We have 3 churches in our neighborhood already and several very adjacent. We also, the other mixed use that is supposedly in there is open space, which is wonderful, except the East End happens to be very fortunate to have some of the most significant open space of any neighborhood in the city. So it wouldn't even really truly qualify as infill mixed use, which my education was always that meant you're putting a single use inside an area that needs that particular use. So given that it doesn't really fulfill any of the city's goals or plannings for this site, it's really unfortunate for our neighborhood to lose the one and only opportunity we really will ever have for a neighborhood activity center in this neighborhood. But to that end, if you do decide to approve this, I would request and really urge you to add these conditions. There will be more traffic. This is not a local or neighborhood user. It will be drawing regionally, and they're asking to add 105 parking spaces for a total of 263. A facility that needs that many parking spaces definitely is not a neighborhood activity center. So we need to have safety street improvements made on both Avenue H and Reserve. Avenue H is going to become part of the Franklin Bikeway in the future. And we asked for this for the townhomes across the street. It did not happen. I would love to see, in addition to the detached sidewalks that they're putting on Avenue H and Reserve, the one on Reserve's already there, to have some curb extensions at both of those corners. It would really help slow down the vehicle traffic on Avenue H. We're working with ACHD to hopefully someday have Reserve and H and Franklin have a three-way stop, because that's what's needed. When St. Luke's closed many of its corridors, especially Fort, during the building of the roundabout, people discovered Avenue H, and it has become a major connector and heavily used. It is also walked and biked daily by many, many, many people in and out of the foothills and over to the parks. So I would really urge you to consider at least requesting that they, as a condition, put a curb extension at those two locations to help calm traffic. And also, I'd love to see a crosswalk across Reserve over to the very poorly maintained trail that people use to go up into Fort Boise. Thank you.
All right, next up. Again, please state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, my name's Eric Kingston. I live at 1010 East Jefferson. And I have since 2007 been maintaining a website called reservestreetarmory.com that basically is a kind of a place to put all the history of the building, all the documentation of our work as a subcommittee that was convened originally by ENA back in 2007. Lots of multimedia stuff, lots of photos of the interior and exterior, lots of neighborhood comments. As a group, since 2007, we've met with hundreds of stakeholders, including neighbors. We worked with the Urban Research and Design Center back in the day to hold visioning sessions. Everybody has consistently said what we need here is what Boise defines as a neighborhood activity center. And that is an area that attracts people for shopping, work, school, recreation, and/or socializing. A single-use tenant or single-use owner does not meet that definition. So I would agree with the previous two folks testifying. And, you know, I want to point out, I mean, this precedes the current administration, but in the last 3 successive administrations in Boise, we've seen a lack of vision and a lack of thought about this really crucial property that is a nexus among 4 distinct neighborhoods. And as Deanna mentioned earlier, I'm one of those people that walk past it every single day. So I see the weeds growing, I see the water's been turned off, I see the trees and landscape stressed, I see the graffiti growing. That's one of the problems we've consistently had with folks who aren't part of the neighborhood or really don't identify with this as part of our heritage and history. And I expect more of folks that are looking to essentially take control of this piece of our history. I would like to see more attention to some of those things that I think would normally be thought of as code enforcement issues, but nothing's ever been done unless the neighbors complain to the city. So I guess I would love to see the site activated and repurposed. But I think ultimately we're, again, as Deanna said, we're losing the chance to have a neighborhood activity center in the truest sense of the word, and the way Boise defines it, by allowing us to go through. So I wish I could be more supportive. And on one hand, I'm glad to see it activated at some point, but I know it's going to be a long slog before it gets to that point. So it's not a project for the faint of heart or lean of wallet, I've always said. Anyway, I appreciate your time and thanks.
Thank you. Come on up. Again, please state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Deb Hennessy, 1205 East Hayes. I bought a 100-year-old home back in 1996 and have since made really good use of that whole area. I've got a few things I'd like to bring up, but first thing I'd like to say, I think it's interesting that the applicant said that they're growing and they want a bigger footprint. Well, they're not going to get it there, right? If they think that's going to be something they see in their near future, they should go south of town. This is a confined area. It's a vital part of our neighborhood, like it's been mentioned. The second thing I'd like to mention is the Armory in our 250th year celebration here. I find it a little frustrating and maybe disturbing that we're taking something that represented what happened in World War II and misusing it. We should be able to do something that shows our appreciation to the veterans who have a veterans home with the hospital just blocks away. I think that's someone's not looked at that clearly. Everyone's mentioned the multiple use, the affordable housing. One of the speakers mentioned the traffic. What I did not hear is Reserve Street goes up to Shaw Mountain Road. And anyone who lives in that neighborhood knows the $1 million houses with the 4 and 5 cars that are parked in the driveway or the garages that come down that road. I live Locust, that comes right off Shenandoah. A lot of the traffic comes there, but I think most of the traffic comes down Shaw Mountain Road. Let's see. I'm late in the game and I've never done this before. I'm really curious about all the discussion about parking, only because it sounds like you're further along with this whole idea than I imagined you'd be. When I saw those white signs go up at the Armory, I took photos and sent to all my neighbors and everything, said, we got to pay attention to this. But it sounds like you're further into the plan already or the approval process. So anyway, as somebody who hikes there, I take my dogs down Mountain Cove Road. If you know that area, you know where that is. There's a dog park, there's a bike park, there's Elks Hospital. St. Luke's is just blocks away. The university's blocks away. There's all those grocery stores for people. There's Roosevelt, there's Adams School, there's the swimming pool at the natatorium. There's so much there that could be used by people who want to invest in affordable housing. And I think this is a waste of my tax dollars that I pay to Boise City in my property tax or to the state or the county. Anyway, like I said, I've never done this before and I probably have, sorry, I'm almost there. Appreciate it. And I would ask that you reconsider this whole thing.
Well, thank you very much. Anybody else, please come up, state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
I'm Pat Lundstrom. And I live at 1110 East Shaw Mountain Road. So we do get all the traffic that goes down there. What really bothers me a lot is the place looks horrible now. I mean, the people have done nothing to keep the trees alive. The grass was up almost to our waist. It is a hot, Idaho's getting hotter and hotter. They say they don't have to put any more grass in or any more trees or any more landscaping. What guarantee do we have that it is going to be a nice place to look at? And why can't we have a little park in there or something for the kids to play in? Why should it only be for a few, and I probably shouldn't say this, a few that's not paying any taxes, and all of us are paying taxes around there? So I don't feel like we should have to look at that parking lot with no trees, no grass, no landscaping, just for a few people that get to enjoy it, not the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Ockery, and I am a tenant of Laurel Parks. 511 North Avenue, H Avenue, apartment 615. And I completely agree with my neighbors. It feels like that this facility, having a church move in, feels like it's multi-use on a technicality. And I'm glad that the heat was brought up because across the way is the Shaw Mountain of Cascadia folks who are elderly. And so every day when I drive by to work on the warmer days, they are wheeled out onto the sidewalk so that they can enjoy a little bit of sunlight. There are very few trees out there. And so they are turned away from this massive building and the baking asphalt, and they are focusing on 1 or 2 trees. On June 5th, I spoke to some of the patients of Shaw Mountain of Cascadia, and they have all said that they would very much enjoy to see more green, more trees and nature. Gothic artists in the Industrial Revolution looked to God in nature. And from a person who has done a church plant before, I feel that this might be short-sighted at this location. The church plant that I helped start up was very small in comparison as far as like the building that we went into, and we could not afford the costs. Attendance is down since 2020. People are viewing church online. So physical attendance is just not where it was like even 10 or 20 years ago. So I think the parking feels excessive. The amount of space that is being asked for feels excessive. And unfortunately, another hot button topic is the politics of today also are very heated. It's just the nature of where we're at. If you go and ask folks what they think about a church moving in, even if they are of the same faith, the same denomination, the very first question that I got was, what kind of church? So we live in a very divisive time. And I just think having another church in the area might further divide us rather than be a tight-knit community center. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Is there anybody else would like, please come on up. Just state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Ryan Dudley. I live at 511 North Avenue H, just overlooking the proposed site. I'm here today to voice my disapproval of the proposed construction of a new religious institution next to the fire station. I support the idea that the current lot be developed for a small community park instead. Across the street from the site, as Emily mentioned, is an assisted living facility, and every evening as I walk my dog, I see elderly residents with mobility issues sit on the corner. Building a park here would further the city's goal of every resident living within 10 minutes of a park. A quick internet search shows that there are over 640 religious organizations and churches in the greater Boise area. Earlier today, I timed my walk from the proposed site to the nearest church, and my watch read 7 minutes and 31 seconds. In addition to the community, this would also benefit our pollinators and provide an opportunity to encourage the growth of plants native to the area. A church and parking lot of this size would not contribute to the natural beauty, recreation, or walkability of our East End neighborhood. The current proposition increases Boise's dependency on cars, and we should be doing the exact opposite. While I understand the desire to build a church to serve the Christian community, a park would benefit people of all beliefs in a variety of ways. Additionally, while a small cafe has been mentioned as part of the space, parks serve as one of the few remaining spaces where people are not expected or required to spend money. Turning the old armory into a park in a way would be turning our swords into plowshares. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you got, please.
Hello, my name is Gary Rogers. I live at 612 East Crawl Street within a stone's throw of the Armory. And I'm not here to oppose, I'm here to support this. This has been an eyesore in the neighborhood for many, many, many years. I've been in the real estate development business for 40 years, and I know what it takes to make something happen. And there's a lot of reasons why this has never happened before. And you have an opportunity before you right now to change something that has been very, very dilapidated in the community. I also walk right by the site every day, twice a day on many days now that it's hot. And I walk up into the hills and enjoy that with my dog. I can't think of a better use. It's not going to be overused. Yes, there's a need for the parking. I think they have respectfully addressed the neighbors' concerns and making sure that there's plenty of parking for the time on Sundays when there's going to be the largest amount of people there. I hope and pray that someday we have to be back before you. And I will say, I do attend the church. And I hope someday we will be back before you with a plan for a parking structure, because there's a need. And I think that as this plan evolves and as the design review process goes through, you will probably see a little bit more greenery. I think everybody desires that. Right now we need to get through the approval process so that we can continue to move forward. But I strongly support it and urge your support and approval of the CUP. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in person who'd like to testify on this topic? Seeing none, we'll move to online. Is there anybody online? Okay. Seeing no more testimony, we will move to rebuttal by the applicant.
Thank you. Elizabeth Kekritz with Givens Pursley. Just touching on a few points that were made. First, the parking lot, the trees. Some of the trees are coming down, but a significant number of more trees will be planted. There are going to be 8-foot street buffers on both Logan Street and Avenue H. There are required trees to be planted in those. To the extent that Reserve Street doesn't have the sufficient number of trees or the right width on their landscape buffer, which is 10 feet there, there will be additional trees planted there. There is a landscape plan in your packet. I did not include it on a slide, but it is there. 78 trees are required. There will actually be 84 trees, including trees on all of the parking islands. So there is a significant amount of canopy that will be gained through this development, and many of the older sort of scrubbier trees will be removed to be replaced with healthier trees. This building has stood vacant for years and years and years. The last use proposed, they did propose the apartments that the city had been looking at, but they never really came up with a plan for the building. The plan was to just try to make the money off of the apartments and leave the building more or less vacant in the hopes that something eventually came along, because it is so expensive and difficult to do all of the upkeep to this building. ACHD had no concerns with the development. They had some standard conditions of approval. What they requested are all things, it's in your packet, that we absolutely are able and willing to meet. There is also, in that green grassy area, we are trying to meet the design standards of the MX1 area to the extent possible. There is a community gathering space. There's a bench there. Because this is a pre-existing building, we're not being asked to meet all of the design standards. You couldn't do that with the building on the historic registry, but we can certainly try to meet the ones that we can. And so they are installing benches in that green grassy area that exceeds what the city would typically allow for a green grassy area. And then finally, just to raise the issue, but not to beat this or to go into this, this is a religious use. And so there are, of course, well, maybe not of course, but there are some slightly different standards that do apply when you're looking at religious use. There are two federal and state laws, both the RLUIPA and then the state one is the FERPA, which is the Religious Freedom Protection Act for the state of Idaho. And the city would have to have really strong reasons. They're not evaluating this. They're not necessarily evaluating this under the same standards that you're looking at for other conditional uses, but rather the government may only substantially burden a person's exercise of religion only if it demonstrates that the application of the burden to the person is both essential to a compelling government interest and the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling government interest. And we don't want to spend a lot of time going into this because I do believe that this application absolutely, positively stands on its own with the conditional use permit. But there is nothing greater than denying a church the right to a church use for where their congregants are going to come and gather. That is the most central religious use that you can think of. That's not like just admin buildings or maybe a soup kitchen over here. This is the central purpose of this church. And so but really when you look at it, there's a lot of great things that are coming out of this without even having to go there. It checks all the boxes for a conditional use. It is an activation of this site. It's in private hands. The city made that decision in 2012. They land swapped this property into private hands. And since then, due to the expenses associated with this site, no uses have taken hold here. This is something that is ready to come here. The impact on the neighborhood is really, really minimal. The applicant, the church, they're really trying to meet all the boxes, to do all the landscaping, to bring in the additional trees, to include amenities for the public, to really seamlessly integrate into this neighborhood. And so for that reason, we would ask for your approval of the conditional use permit.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And with that, we'll close the public portion of the hearing and render a decision. And just as a reminder, this is CUP 25-11, and we are the approving body.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Mooney.
I recommend we approve CUP 2511 for the terms and for all the reasons that are stated in the staff report, with an additional condition of approval that states that the applicant will work with ACHD to ensure that traffic calming elements are considered for Avenue H and Reserve Street.
Second.
So I have a motion by Commissioner Mooney and a second by Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Mooney, do you want to start off?
Sure. I agree with staff and I'm sensitive to obviously all the testimony regarding the community center and the lost opportunity, as many of our friends have testified tonight. But it's a compatible use. It provides a mix of uses. I agree that the coffee cafe is pretty limited, but it is, according to the applicant, going to be offered to the public. I really like the amenity on Reserve Street in that traffic or in that landscaped area. It aligns with all the goals, and I agree with staff that Blueprint Boise is a guidance, and the code's pretty clear here that this is a quality project for this site.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Commissioner Mooney. I'm obviously in agreement with the motion. Thank you to the applicant team. Thanks to all the testimony here. I agree with John's comments, Commissioner Mooney's comments about the project. The fact remains, we approved housing on this site in 2022, right? It didn't happen. So do you keep kicking the can down the road? I think in a lot of folks' mind, there's some magical solution here that has not been presented in the last 20 years that we've been talking about this site, right? And we tried, we approved housing, we had testimony to the opposite, in that hearing, right? There's too many people on this site, there's too much use. So now here we are, I think, with a use that is appropriate. And in a lot of ways, what they're really just doing is formalize, like the additional parking, for example. They're really just formalizing the gravel drive that exists behind the building now. We're adding some parking, yes, and we are paving some more, but we're not losing any landscape in doing that, right? We're losing a gravel driveway that's behind the building. So I'm comfortable with the proposal. The fact remains it's private development. Housing has been tried here. It didn't take. And I think this use works here, quite frankly. You're talking about 4 or 5 days worth of activities. You're gonna have people working there on the site every work day. You're gonna have activities on the weekend. You're gonna have some activities in the evening, and they're gonna take care of the place. So for me, it checks a lot of boxes, and I'm in full support.
Commissioner Schaefer, any other comments?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Seha.
I struggled with this one. We're bound by the modern zoning code. The original zoning went from R2 and R3 to C-2 development agreement, which now equates to MX1. When I go to our modern zoning code and I look at the purpose of the MX1 mixed use neighborhood, it says it's a district that is intended to provide opportunities for a mix of neighborhood serving small-scale commercial, institutional, and residential uses. It is intended to facilitate convenient, walkable access to those services while fostering PED-oriented design and the creation of neighborhood districts. I am stuck on mixed use. While our foundation is the modern zoning code, we still look at the comp plan, right? But we don't make our decisions on the comp plan. Again, I'm still struggling with this because, when you do go to the comp plan, and my argument here is I respectfully disagree that this application applies with the comp plan per the conditions of approval in our planning document. So in the comp plan, neighborhood activity centers are intended to serve one or more neighborhoods and are characterized by small-scale retail and service uses that may include mixed use or attached housing opportunities. These centers are characterized by a compact scale and pedestrian-friendly design that encourages pedestrian access from adjacent neighborhoods. And the examples given in the comp plan are Hyde Park, 36th and Hill Road, and Bound Crossing. And I think each and every one of us on the diocese and those of you attending know these places very well. Furthermore, the Northeast End Neighborhood Plan states designated activity centers. Again, there it identifies these different entities. And then there's the section about the armory. So the cafe, really the coffee bar that I think according to one of the individuals that provided comment this evening is about 48 square feet. And in what I understood from the applicant's representative is that coffee bar will be available when there are folks at the church. So again, I'm struggling. I don't see a problem at all with having a religious entity as part of the use, but we need something additional than a 48 square foot coffee bar. So I will be voting no.
Thank you, Commissioner Seha. Any other comments?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Stallings.
Yeah, I too am struggling. Again, I also don't have any, it's not about, the development group or the purpose of the development that I'm struggling with. The struggle for me is similar. the mixed use and the activated times. It feels like a lot of surface parking for one, maybe 12-hour time at best per all week for this neighborhood that's already, blasted with heat. And I know we discussed additional landscaping and trees, but for the size of the site, the proportion felt off there. And then I too, just this amenity feels like for the purpose of the staff within that building that will be there, during office hours. I don't see how that's an amenity for the neighborhood or for the community in the purpose of a mixed use property. So I too am inclined to vote no.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Torres.
I've also struggled with this one for the same reasons as Commissioner Seha and Commissioner Stallings. It seems like if you really twist it, you can get it to meet the definition of mixed use, but I agree with my colleagues that I don't really see it. And I am troubled by the amount of parking still. I know there's no parking maximum required in the code, but I also know a large asphalt parking lot, even if most of it is already there, does fly in the face of the city's goals to decrease suburban sprawl and not have people commuting from all across the valley into our denser neighborhoods and all that, and to encourage denser development. On the other hand, I am also struggling with the fact that the site has been vacant for, it seems like forever. It's an eyesore. Something needs to go into this building before it collapses. But I'm not sure this is the right use for it. And it really has nothing to do with it being a church. It really is the type of construction that's being, not construction, the type of site that's being considered, the very, I used the word before, the very suburban nature of this site doesn't really fit the East End or the city's goals for land use policy in the city. So I've gone back and forth, but I'm going to reluctantly vote no on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Torres. Commissioner Down.
Sure. I'm going to be in support of the motion. I appreciate all the comments that have been made up here and the people from the neighborhoods that came and spoke. Appreciate that. I just feel that it's an existing building. It's been empty forever. There's an opportunity. It's a private ownership, so we can't dictate what they get to build there. We just get to see if it fits within the code. So, and I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Down. And any other comments? I think everybody's signed in. So I'll add to it. I'll also be in support of the motion. I think for me, the biggest piece of this is this building has been vacant for 30 years. And yeah, the longer it sits vacant, I think the more deteriorated it's going to get, the more difficult it's going to get to reuse it, and the greater potential there is for it to ultimately go away. And then instead of having our historic National Register landmark, it's gone and it'll be something else. And I think that trade-off for me is worth it for this particular use, and the chance that it will be used, it will be maintained, it will be improved and made safe. And it will continue on as, a piece of this neighborhood. And I think it does add neighborhood character and all of that good stuff. And I think that is part of the comp plan. I think that is part of what a lot of the reusing existing buildings portion of the city code and the zoning code is about, is maintaining some of that character, and especially in buildings like this. And I think that this is a really good example of why why those sections and why those pieces of code exist. I would like to see a bigger cafe space though, or something more presence on the outside or something like that. Not going to design from there, but I think it might be a little bit more exciting, more obvious. Right now it's kind of off to the side, off of Avenue H. It's kind of tucked away. It's a little bit confusing what exactly is going on there.
I do agree to keep the EV charging. It's, it's EV capable, not EV installed. And, I think the clarification about the space sizes is appropriate there, and it can be restriped later. On the parking piece, the best case scenario is, a couple years down the road, you realize it's too much parking and you have to do something else, or want to do something else with that space. And, that's not a guarantee, but, there is the real possibility that that is actually the case too. And then, just some consideration to, opening some of these rooms up. I mean, I know that, you're offering, free programming for public, but, maybe there's some opportunity to let the community use some rooms or something like that too, just to kind of help with the mixed use, kind of bring some of that mixed use back in and some of the intent of the zone. But that's all that I've got. So if there are no more comments, will the clerk please call the roll? We've got a recommendation of approval with the condition that the applicant will work with ACHD on traffic calming measures. Is that
Traffic calming on Avenue H and Reserve.
on Avenue H and Reserve?
Moore,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Mooney,
Yes.
Teja,
No.
Torres,
No.
Stone,
Yes.
Stallings,
No.
4 in favor, 3 opposed, motion carries.
Perfect. And with that, we will close the public hearing. Have a good night.